Most of us know Bayer for aspirin, but in the 1940s, the men running this company sold more than medicine. They built their own concentration camp and purchased human beings for experiments. When the war ended, the man who planned that slave labor camp came back to run the company instead of going to prison for life. This is the history of the world's biggest chemical giant joining forces with the Third Reich. To understand the crime, you have to understand the power. Bayer merged with BASF, Hoechst, and 3 other German firms in 1925 to form a colossal entity called IG Farben. This was more than a company. It was a state within a state. They were the 4th largest corporation on Earth by the 1930s and controlled the global supply of synthetic dyes and chemicals. Their ambition went further. IG Farben saw an opportunity rather than a threat when the Nazi Party rose to power. A meeting in 1933 secured their funding for the regime, and they became the industrial engine of the German war machine. The war would have stopped before it started without them. Tanks need rubber treads, and trucks need tires. But Germany had no oil fields or rubber plantations. The British Navy could blockade the ports and starve the army of supplies. So IG Farben offered a scientific solution. They held the patents for synthetic rubber, known as Buna, and synthetic fuel made from coal. This chemistry required massive quantities of electricity and labor. In 1941, they identified a spot on the map of occupied Poland that had water, nearby coal mines, and a limitless supply of workers. The town was called Oswiecim, but the Germans called it Auschwitz. Concentration camps are usually seen as state-run facilities, but IG Farben built their own. It was called Auschwitz III, or Monowitz. This was the first concentration camp in history financed and built by a private corporation, with an investment of over 700 million Reichsmarks. The plan focused on efficiency. Executives wanted to house prisoners next to the machines, rather than waste time marching them from the main camp. They viewed these prisoners as units of energy to be consumed until depleted, and the depletion rate was terrifying. Business relies on contracts, and IG Farben had a contract with the SS that set a daily rate for every head. They paid 4 Reichsmarks for a skilled worker, 3 for an unskilled one, and 1.5 for a child. This was a specific rental agreement rather than abstract forced labor. The company expected value for that money, so supervisors beat men who moved too slowly. The construction site became a muddy landscape of steel and concrete, where falling behind meant death. Survivors like Primo Levi later described the sign over the entrance to the camp. It displayed the company name instead of the phrase, "Work sets you free." The average life expectancy for a worker here was 3 to 4 months. We are uncovering history that often gets left out of the textbooks. If you believe it is important to remember these stories, please subscribe to support our research. The horror at Monowitz extended beyond the construction site. The cruelty reached from the factory floor into the laboratories. Documents discovered after the war revealed correspondence between Bayer's pharmaceutical division and the camp commandant. The company wanted to test a new sleeping drug, but they asked for 150 women instead of laboratory rats. The camp demanded 200 Reichsmarks per person, but the company haggled them down to 170. Once the deal was made and the women were delivered, a later letter from the company stated that all the test subjects died during the experiments. They promised to contact the camp shortly about a new shipment, treating these murders like a supply chain issue. Dr. Helmut Vetter managed many of these tests on the ground. He was an SS captain who also worked as an employee of the Bayer Group. Vetter moved between Auschwitz and Mauthausen, carrying vials of unproven drugs labeled B1012 and Rutenol. He injected healthy prisoners with typhus to see if the drugs would cure them, but the victims vomited blood and died while he took notes. Vetter was on the payroll rather than acting as a rogue agent. He sent reports back to headquarters in Leverkusen, where the company used the camps as a vast research lab to develop products for the post-war market. Zyklon B was the agent used to murder over 1 million people. It was produced by a company called Dagesh, which was technically independent, but IG Farben owned 42.5% of the shares and held seats on the board. They understood the product well. Zyklon B was originally a pesticide with a strong warning odor to prevent accidental inhalation, but the SS requested a version without the smell. The company complied by removing the warning agent and breaking their own safety laws. Profit from the gas that killed their own slave laborers flowed back into the corporate accounts. By January 1945, the Soviet army was closing in, and the artillery grew louder at Monowitz. The executives realized the end was near, but their priority was saving themselves rather than the prisoners. They ordered the burning of tons of files, including records of payments, letters about experiments, and personnel files. The shredders in Frankfurt ran hot as American troops approached. They destroyed 15 tons of paper in the belief that eliminating the paper trail would eliminate the crime. They were partially correct, but enough fragments survived to build a case. The reckoning came in 1947 when 24 directors of IG Farben sat in the dock at Nuremberg, charged with slavery and mass murder. The prosecution argued these men were the machinists of the devil, but the defense claimed necessity. They argued they were just businessmen, forced by the Nazi regime to use slave labor to survive. The judges were lenient because they worried about rebuilding a strong Germany against the Soviet Union. 13 directors were sentenced to prison, but most received short terms. The punishment was minimal, considering the death of thousands. Fritz Tamir was one of the highest-ranking men in the dock. He had personally visited Auschwitz, planned the Monowitz site, and defended the use of slave labor. He was sentenced to 7 years, but was released by 1950 for good behavior. In 1956, the newly independent Bayer needed a chairman for its supervisory board and chose Fritz Tamir. The man who built a concentration camp returned to lead the company and held that position until 1964. The Allies broke up IG Farben because the conglomerate was too dangerous to exist as a single entity. In the early 1950s, the assets were divided, and the original companies, Bayer, BASF, and Hearst, emerged from the parent company. They reclaimed their old names, factories, and patents. Shareholders were allowed to swap their IG Farben stock for shares in the new companies. The wealth generated by the war machine was redistributed rather than confiscated. Bayer returned with a clean surface, but remained built on the same foundation. Survivors waited decades for an apology that did not come. The new companies argued they were legally new entities and not responsible for the crimes of IG Farben. Survivors filed lawsuits, but the payouts were meager or non-existent. The men enslaved at Monowitz watched as the companies that used them grew into global economic superpowers. The silence finally broke in 1995 when the head of Bayer publicly apologized to Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel. But the words arrived half a century too late for many. The company handles this history differently today. In 2026, you can visit the Hans and Berthold Finkelstein Foundation, an initiative Bayer supports to research this dark past. They have paid millions into compensation funds for forced laborers, and the company website acknowledges the crimes of IG Farben openly. However, the question persists regarding whether money can ever balance the scale. The monuments and foundations stand alongside the history, making this a central case study for corporate ethics. The factory at Monowitz is gone, and the chimneys have been cold for 80 years. But the lesson remains. The story of Bayer and IG Farben demonstrates that science without ethics is a weapon, and that corporate profit can rationalize the unimaginable. Looking at the giants of industry today requires remembering how easily the line was crossed. Managers and accountants signed the papers to buy 150 women rather than monsters. They were simply people doing their jobs. The history of the 20th century is written in the lives of the people who suffered and in the ledgers of the companies that profited. Bayer survived its darkest chapter to become a household name again, but Monowitz is part of that legacy. Understanding this past helps us demand more from the powerful today. Please subscribe if you want to see more investigations into history's hidden files, and I will see you in the next video.